If you're watching this video, you have already drafted your 3 body paragraphs. All that you need to write now is your introductory paragraph and your concluding paragraph. This video is going to teach you how to write your introductory paragraph. What you're looking at here is the organization for your informational essay. I want you to notice that it's shaped like an hourglass. It's big at the top, narrows throughout the middle, and then is big again at the bottom. I want you to remember this shape as you're writing your introductory paragraph today. Your introductory paragraph is going to start really big, and then you're going to narrow to your controlling idea. Let's look at that organization now. So there are 3 parts of your introductory paragraph: the big picture, the transition, and your controlling idea or thesis statement. We're going to start with the big picture. Remember, we're starting big. When you talk about the big picture, what you're going to do is you're going to discuss the problem that your country is facing. And you're going to talk about it on a global level. I want you to ask yourself, what makes the way that my country is impacted by climate change unique? When you look at your 3 body paragraphs, is there a theme that runs throughout all 3? For example, when I look at my 3 body paragraphs about how climate change impacts Egypt, one thing that I notice is that all 3 body paragraphs are discussing natural resources and how climate change gets in the way of Egypt's access to those natural resources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my introductory paragraph by talking about natural resources and how they're impacted by climate change around the globe. I'm not talking about Egypt yet. I'm talking about how natural resources are impacted throughout the world, around the globe. Another example of this might be if you are an island nation like the Marshall Islands or the Philippines. All of the ways that you or your country are impacted by climate change have to do with the ocean and the warming of the ocean. Sea levels rising, coral bleaching, right? All of those have to do with the warming of the ocean. So you might talk about how island nations are in particular affected by climate change and how that has to do with the warming of the oceans. You're not going to talk about your specific country yet. You're going to start big. Let's look at my example. So when I look at my big picture, think about my big picture for Egypt. My big picture is all about natural resources and how they're impacted by climate change. Where do people choose to settle? One of the key factors that impacts where people settle is access to natural resources. This includes clean water, fertile soil, and easy access to food like animals and fish. We're beginning to see the changes in the climate of areas rich in natural resources. In fact, although climate change is becoming more and more visible throughout the world, the countries who rely on natural resources are the most vulnerable to climate change. Notice that I'm not yet talking about Egypt. I'm talking about natural resources and how they're impacted by climate change throughout the world. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause the video. I want you to go and I want you to ask yourself first, what makes the way my country is impacted by climate change unique? And then think about how can you discuss how this affects the whole world? Okay, at this point, you've written your big picture. The next step is to transition. This is where you're going to transition, and it's not going to be a one-sentence transition like we've been writing in our body paragraphs. Your transition here is going to be a little bit longer. You're going to transition to discussing how this problem's affecting your country. So let's look at my example. I want to read just the end of my big picture so that you hear this transition. In fact, although climate change is becoming more and more visible throughout the world, the countries who rely on natural resources are the most vulnerable to climate change. One of those countries is Egypt. Do you hear it? It's a really clear, natural transition. The majority of Egypt's population lives in a small area in northern Egypt, along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and in the Nile Delta. The reason that they first settled here was the abundance of natural resources, all of which are at risk because of climate change. Pause the video now. reread your big picture, and then write a transition to discussing your country. Okay, at this point, you should have written the big picture as well as transition to discussing your particular country. Now we need our controlling idea or thesis statement. This is the most important sentence, and it's probably the easiest to write. Your controlling idea or thesis statement is the central idea of your essay. We've learned a lot about how to identify the central idea. The central idea, remember, is the big idea that we see developed throughout the text. This is your controlling idea. All of your body paragraphs need to fit under this one idea. For example, my controlling idea is Northern Egypt is experiencing the consequences of climate change. It has begun to find ways to adapt. So I have that here. Northern Egypt is experiencing the consequences of climate change. It has begun to find ways to adapt. When you think about my 3 body paragraphs, all 3 of those body paragraphs are about how Egypt is impacted by climate change and how it's beginning to adapt. If you struggle with how to write your controlling idea, I want you to think about making it clear and focused, but also big enough that all 3 of your body paragraphs fit underneath of it. Okay, pause the video now, go and write your controlling idea or thesis statement. And you're done. You have your introductory paragraph written.